This week I thought I'd do a quick review on the Dyna III ignition system that I fitted to my Moto Guzzi Le Mans. I fitted it about a year ago. The ignition timing was getting difficult to set on this bike because the points plate, all the threads were fairly worn, and it was sort of difficult to actually get the ignition timing to stay in place when you're tightening up and loosening screws. And it wasn't quite tightening properly, so the timing was drifting a little bit. So I decided to go for a Dyna III ignition system. It's sort of about, I suppose in Australia, around $260 Australian, so it wasn't bad value. Now, timing the engine is quite straightforward. You take the inspection plug out on the flywheel right hand side there, so you can see the timing marks on the flywheel. I just put the bike into top gear and use the rear wheel to turn the engine over. You'll also need to take these spark plugs out to make it a bit easier to turn the engine over past compression. And you rotate the engine around so that the right-hand cylinder is on its firing stroke. Now, if you do this before you take the points plate out, you'll be able to tell the firing point because the upper or left-hand points, it's a bit confusing, Moto Guzzi have the points in the opposite side to the actual cylinder, so that the left-hand points fire the right-hand cylinder and the right-hand points fire the left-hand cylinder. Typical Moto Guzzi, I guess. So you rotate the engine around until you can see the top dead center mark for the right-hand cylinder, and the points have just opened, you're on the firing stroke. You can then take the points plate out and clean the area and install the Dynatech ignition module. Then you need to install the button, which is held on with a Allen key. That's just an alloy button with no doubt a magnet inserted in it, and you line up the two marks. Now, I found that those marks were a pretty rough guide, and my ignition timing really was nowhere near where those marks were. It was actually a few degrees away from where they are lined up in the end. But because you're going to statically time it anyway, and you can use either a light bulb or a multimeter across the particular coil that you're going to be timing. Now, Dynatech have pretty good instructions that come with the unit, so it's really not that hard to actually time the engine. The only thing that you may find difficult is that this assembly down here, to rotate the whole assembly to get your timing for your right-hand cylinder correct, you really do need a special tool like this. Now, I made this up years ago from an old spanner, and that just fits in nicely on either side to loosen the two clamp bolts at the bottom there. Without something like this, you're going to find it rather difficult doing it yourself. Once you've done your static timing, you then run the engine and put a timing light on it and check the timing of the right-hand cylinder, and once you've got that right, the left hand should be spot on or pretty close. You can actually loosen the two little bolts here and rotate the individual sensors so that they are, I guess, individually adjustable if need be, if one is out in relation to the other, to get the timing right. My experience has been pretty good, but I got off to a fairly shaky start in that the ignition coils that were on this bike didn't like the Dyna system. They were overheating. Now, electronic ignition systems typically do run a greater dwell. I won't go into that in this, it's sort of beyond the scope of this particular video. But if you're looking at electronic ignition systems, it'll be well worth reading up through Google on dwell time and the sort of benefits that you get from electronic ignition systems. So I had a couple of, two coil failures, one with one of the original coils and one with a replacement coil that I put in the bike. Now, down the track, about 9 months later, I started having issues with the ignition system again, in that I started to get poor idling and I guess misfiring just off idle, and eventually the bike ran on one cylinder. Unfortunately, it was about 40 kilometres from home, so I had to ride home on one cylinder, which was not a fun experience. I then packaged the system up after getting I suppose a warranty claim number from Dyna, and I posted it back to the United States. And 3 weeks later, I received a package in the mail with a replacement module. They had deemed that it was faulty and had replaced it free of charge. And I must say their customer service was pretty outstanding in the fact that it was a fairly short turnaround time for an international package, and their communications via email was very good. So this time round I decided I would up the ante a little bit and I'd fit the recommended Dyna coils. Now Dyna recommend that you use 5 ohm coils, but you will find in some of their earlier documentation that they should be 3 ohms or greater. I certainly don't recommend you running 3 ohm coils with Dyna systems. I'm sure they would get way too hot. And even the stock coils, well, they were stock aftermarket coils that I was running, were running pretty hot. And I have discovered with these Dyna coils that they run a lot cooler than the coils I was running, and the system seems to be running quite flawlessly 1 month later. And fingers crossed, I'm sure it will be pretty good into the future. Now the Dyna coils are a little bit bigger than the stock coils and have quite a different mount. They're a modern style of coils, so they're not like a can coil at all, as you can see. And I made up an aluminium bracket, which was just a 1/2 inch bar of alloy, and used threaded rod to mount the coils on each side with a bit of clearance so that they weren't pressing on the alloy bar in the middle. Now with the Le Mans 1000, I had plenty of room to do this under the side cover, but you may find in a Le Mans 1 or 2 with its smaller side covers that it may be a bit more difficult to shoehorn these coils in to the original position. Well, I'd have to say in conclusion, this has been a pretty good upgrade for me, apart from the failure of the module a couple of months ago. Certainly the idle has just been brilliant since I fitted the Dyna III ignition system, and if you've got a slightly worn motor that's perhaps burning a little bit of oil, you will find the extra spark will certainly help the bike idle and run better at all RPMs. So with that in mind, I'd certainly recommend the Dyna III system so far. I'll give you another update perhaps in a year or so's time and let you know how it performs long term. See you next time.